Welcome. I'm Joe Luff, and this is the final seminar on the Theology of Karl Marx, coming to you live from the C. Robbins Clark Library at St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Berkeley. To access the seminar syllabus, migrate to newconsensus.org/syllabus.html. There you will find links to all our readings, as well as to links to the first 7 seminars. To learn more, you can email me at josephluff@gmail.com. Our thesis has been that Karl Marx erected his critique of modern society around the scaffolding of G.W.F. Hegel's incarnational theology. Christianity is a deeply material spiritual formation centered upon the incarnate God, the Palestinian Jew, Jesus. How could it be otherwise? With the turn of the last millennium, however, Christians began to distance themselves from the material character of their faith. They abandoned Christianity's surface forms of appearance, including the body of their Lord, replacing it with the abstract value form of the commodity. This gave rise to a religious formation far better equipped to survive and thrive in a society where social relations are mediated by commodity production and exchange. Martin Luther celebrated Deus absconditus, the hidden God. Pietists such as Philip Jakob Spener warned Christians not to trust any outward form of appearance, not creeds, confessions, not the Bible, not prayer, not the Holy Eucharist, not even the body of their Lord. Awakening preachers such as Jonathan Edwards celebrated the mortification of the flesh among the spiritually awakened. Christian hostility towards surface forms of appearance left surfaces everywhere vulnerable to widespread depredations. Creation proved especially vulnerable, but so too did the bodies of Africans, of women, of the colonized, the poor, the dependent, children, and workers. A Christianity that celebrated an abstract God offered no protection against a social formation bent on extracting the most value from every surface. Officially sanctioned mass death expanded exponentially. Christian thinkers such as Edmund Burke and Immanuel Kant counted the rapid expansion of death and destruction as evidence of God's presence, the presence of eternity in time. They called this violence the sublime. As we noted in Seminar 5, not all Christians were equally satisfied with how Christians such as Kant handled God's divine presence in time. After all, when God entered time, God was entering something God had made. Hegel therefore invited his readers to see in the pain and suffering of history a process in which God was fully present, drawing all of creation forward to completion. For Hegel, this meant the full knowledge and awareness of human beings in relationship to God and at peace with one another, with God, and with the world. Last week, we saw how Marx transformed Hegel's phenomenology of the spirit into a critique of modern society. He did so first by interpreting Hegel's phenomenology of spirit as a misrecognized instance of the spirit of humanity, Gattungswesen, or species being. He then sought to capture the historical movement of this spirit in the history of class struggle. History was proceeding dialectically through conflict between, quote, freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guild master and journeyman, in a word, oppressor and oppressed, end quote. And now finally, between the bourgeoisie and the industrial working class. When the revolutions of 1848 and 1849 were brutally crushed, however, Marx underwent a crisis of faith. History was dynamic, moving, living, transforming, but the working class appeared less its master than its slave. We concluded last week by examining how Marx reinterpreted Hegel's phenomenology, not as the unfolding of God's spirit, nor as the unfolding of Gattungswesen, of species being, nor even as the realization of species being in the industrial working class. He now viewed the subject of history as the abstract immaterial value form of the commodity. Value, wrote Marx, is constantly changing from one form into the other without becoming lost in this movement. It thus becomes transformed into an automatic subject. If we pin down the specific forms of appearance assumed in turn by self-valorizing value in the course of its life, we reach the following elucidation. Capital is money, capital is commodities. In truth, however, value is here the subject of a process in which, while constantly assuming the form in turn of money and commodities, it changes its own value, throws off surface value from itself considered as original value, and thus valorizes itself independently. Now, in the circulation of M, C, M prime, money, commodities, money expanded, value suddenly it presents itself as a self-moving substance which passes through a process of its own, and for which commodities and money are both mere forms. But there is more to come. Instead of simply representing the relations of commodities, it now enters into a private relationship with itself, as it were. The central contradiction in capitalism was not between the socialized forces of production and the private relations of production, but between the commodity form's surface form of appearance and its underlying abstract value form. The tension between surface form and value form has been visible throughout this seminar, from the violation of the bodies of the Holy Mother and her Son, to the Reformation's elimination of God's body, from the Pietists' prohibition against finding God in anything, to Jonathan Edwards' celebration of the destruction of Abigail Hutchinson's body, from the depredations of the earth's resources to the violations of indigenous peoples, Africans, women, and children everywhere. According to Marx, these crises are evidence of the tension within capitalism between surface forms of appearance and underlying value forms. Wrote Marx, circulation bursts through all the temporal, spatial, and personal barriers imposed by the direct exchange of products, and it does this by splitting up the direct identity present in this case between the exchange of one's own product and the acquisition of someone else's into the two antithetical segments of sale and purchase. To say that these mutually independent and antithetical processes form an internal unity is to say also that their internal unity moves forward through external antitheses. These two processes lack internal independence because they complement each other. Hence, if the assertion of their external independence proceeds to a certain critical point, their unity violently makes itself felt by producing a crisis. There is an antithesis immanent in the commodity between use value and value, between private labor, which must simultaneously manifest itself as directly social labor, and a particular concrete kind of labor, which simultaneously counts as merely abstract universal labor, between the conversion of things into persons and the conversion of persons into things. The antithetical phases of the metamorphosis of the commodity are the developed forms of motion of this immanent contradiction. These forms therefore imply the possibility of crises. though no more than the possibility. No more than the possibility. We are now worlds removed from the so-called ironclad laws of dialectical materialism. The apocalypse is upon us. Crises are flaring up everywhere. The solution, according to Marx, is the gradual decoupling of abstract value and abstract labor from things. Quote, the realm of freedom really begins only where labor determined by necessity and external expediency ends. It lies by its very nature beyond the sphere of material production proper. The reduction of the working day is the basic prerequisite. Does this rise to the level of a theology? Well, not yet, but hear me out. Today, I want to revisit two passages from Capital, Volume 1. Each speaks directly to Marx's theology. I then want us to look at a passage from St. Paul's letter to the Romans. We will conclude by looking at a passage from one of Marx's interpreters, the composer and social theorist Theodor Adorno. Each of these passages opens the possibility of thinking a future of divine materiality. The first passage I want to consider is where Marx identifies modern Christianity as, quote, the most fitting form of religion for a society of commodity producers. Marx tells his readers why. He first invites us to consider that Christians, quote, treat their products as commodities, hence as values. In other words, we do not see the substantive value of things. Instead, we see only their abstract value. More specifically, in our work and in our leisure, in all dimensions of our lives, we rely on the equivalence of highly differentiated surfaces. We rely upon their exchangeability. We do not actually see what they are or even who people are. They are the producers and owners and bearers of commodity. They are themselves commodities. We, quote, bring our individual private labors into relationships to one another as homogeneous human labor, end quote. In this kind of society, writes Marx, Christianity, with its religious cult of man in the abstract, more particularly in its bourgeois development, i.e. in Protestantism, deism, etc., is the most fitting form of religion, end quote. As we noted in sessions 1 through 3, the Christian religion was radically transformed by the introduction of the commodity into Europe beginning in the 12th century. Both Mary and her son lost their particularity, or rather, their particularity was degraded and effaced. What remained were androgynous, completely desexualized cosmic beings, the angelic Mary and her cosmic son, not Jesus, but the Christ. This religion, writes Marx, quote, with its religious cult of man in the abstract, end quote, is within commodity societies the most fitting form of religion. But might not the reverse hold true? Let us suppose that Christianity was not a religion that fetishized man in the abstract. Let us suppose that Christians held the Palestinian Jew Jesus, quote, without confusion, without change, without division, without separation. Let us suppose that they held this Jesus to be, quote, true God from true God and true man. Well, in that case, Christianity would not be the most fitting form of religion. In fact, it would be the least fitting form of religion. It is therefore all the more significant that Marx drew a clear line between classical Christianity and Christianity, quote, in its bourgeois development. Marx appears to have known that Christianity had undergone a profound transformation with the rise of capitalism. He appears to have recognized that in its classical form, Christianity was useless to the capitalist social formation. More broadly speaking, the Christian God was useless. To see why, we need to recall the transformation the Christian God underwent at the hands of Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Hegel had inherited a God who had no body. For Edmund Burke, as for Immanuel Kant, the transcendental subject could not enter time without threatening its integrity, that is, the integrity of creation. When the eternal enters time, it annihilates that which it enters. This was the message Kant had internalized from his strict pietist upbringing. But it was also, more generally, the message reinforced within every commodity society. Services, by themselves, have no value. Value arises not from the substances out of which things are composed, but from the equal units of abstract time consumed in their composition. Hegel objected. God had created the world. God was moving in the world. God was shaping the world. Hegel therefore invited his readers to see in the full sweep of history all that is, quote, one absolute substance. Many religious thinkers have seen in Hegel's God their own, from Franz Rosenzweig to Hans Küng, from Dorothee Sölle to Wolfhard Pannenberg and Jürgen Moltmann. Religious thinkers have modeled their own theological thinking after Hegel's phenomenology of spirit. Marx, too, had his own fling with Hegel, fashioning his grasp of the industrial working class in the image of Hegel's world spirit. By the 1850s, however, Marx had clearly lost faith in this God. Recall Marx's description of the abstract value form of the commodity, which he described as the self-moving subject that is subject, self-moving subject that is substance. If there is a God within capitalist societies, this is that God, which makes the coda to Marx's description in that passage all the more damning. Quote, instead of simply representing the relations of commodities, value now enters into a private relationship with itself, as it were. It differentiates itself as original value from itself as surplus value, just as God the Father differentiates himself from himself as God the Son, although both are of the same age and form, in fact, one single person. Let that sink in. Marx is saying that the Christian understanding of God is that the Son is identical to the Father. This is not classical Trinitarian theology. At best, it is some version of modalism or emanationism, both of which have been condemned as heresies. But is this not what many Christians believe about God? Is this not what Hegel believed? God, according to Hegel, is one absolute substance. In case you missed it, here it is again. Quote, further, the living substance is being which is in truth subject, or, what is the same, is in truth actual only insofar as it is the movement of positing itself, or is the mediation of its self-othering with itself. This substance is, as subject, pure simple negativity, and is for this very reason the bifurcation of the simple. It is the doubling which sets up opposition, and then again the negation of this indifferent diversity and of its antithesis. That is the antithesis of the immediate simplicity. Only this self-restoring sameness, or this reflection in otherness within itself, not an original or immediate unity as such, is the true. We get Hegel's point. How does one absolute substance give rise to everything, much less anything? Some of the most thoughtful theological thinkers, Christians and Jews, have believed they found the true God in Hegel's description. Marx thought he saw something else. The abstract value form of the commodity, objectifying itself and completing itself in the process of production and consumption and expansion. Marx, in other words, did not see God, or rather, he saw the bourgeois God. But if God is not one absolute substance, what is God? What is God? What if God is not in the abstract? What if God is not the cosmic Christ, not humanity? What if God is the Palestinian Jew, Jesus? Quote, where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? So writes the Apostle Paul. For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, God decided through the foolishness of our proclamation to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks desire wisdom, but we proclaim Christ crucified. To our knowledge, Marx did not believe this, but he might have. There is nothing in his critique of a modern society to suggest that this God, not the bourgeois God, but the crucified God, has played any role at all in modern society's composition. To the contrary, quote, consider your own call, brothers and sisters. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many of you were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, things that are not, to reduce to nothing things that are. Last week, we looked at the tension between surface forms and underlying value forms immanent to the commodity. And we saw how this tension has given rise to today's crises rippling across the face of the globe. There we noted Marx's solution to this tension, to decouple things from the abstract value form of the commodity. How? By decoupling labor and its products from abstract value. How? By reducing the length of the workday. Today, I want to take this one step further. What if things, including people, are valued for the substances out of which they are composed, not for the abstract time consumed in their composition? Quote, none of the rulers of this age understood this, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. End quote. Who would ever believe a carpenter's son, the son of Mary in Galilee, would be the Lord of glory? Who? Except for those who value individuals not for their abstract immaterial spirit, but for their particular being. Did Marx embrace this particular being, this Palestinian Jew? All evidence suggests that he did not, but he might have. Again, there is nothing in his critique of modern society that suggests a critique of the Palestinian Jew, Jesus. Not one absolute substance, but divine materiality. I want now to turn to another Jewish thinker, the German composer and philosopher Theodor Adorno. I want us to look at the final reflection in his collection Minima Moralia, Reflexionen aus dem beschädigten Leben, Reflections on a Damaged Life. Adorno's final reflection is titled Finale. It reads, "The only philosophy which can be responsibly practiced in the face of despair is the attempt to contemplate all things as they would present themselves from the standpoint of redemption. Knowledge has no light but that shed on the world by redemption. All else is construction, mere technique. Perspectives must be fashioned that displace and estrange the world, reveal it to be, with its rifts and crevices, as indigent and distorted as it will appear one day in the messianic light. To gain such perspectives without velleity or violence, entirely from felt contact with its objects, this alone is the task of thought. It is the simplest of all things, because the situation calls imperatively for such knowledge, indeed because consummate negativity, once squarely faced, delineates the mere image of its opposite. But it is also the utterly impossible thing, because it presupposes a standpoint removed, even though by a hair's breadth, from the scope of existence, whereas we well know that any possible knowledge must not only be first wrestled from what is, if it shall hold good, but is also marked for this very reason by the same distortion and indigence which it seeks to escape. The more passionately thought denies its conditionality for the sake of the unconditional, the more unconsciously and so calamitously it is delivered up to the world. Even its own impossibility, it must at last comprehend for the sake of the possible. But beside the demand thus placed on thought, the question of the reality or unreality of redemption itself hardly matters. I think this is among the most beautiful theological reflections composed in the 20th century, composed by an atheist, by a Marxist. It does have its flaws. Adorno was schooled at gymnasium in Weimar, Germany. His thought is drenched in transcendental idealism. In spite of this, or perhaps because of it, Adorno grasps the emancipatory promise of the particular, the individual, the non-identical. He sees that emancipation is not the same as the elimination of all rifts and crevices or all distortions. Were that the case, then God could not be a Palestinian Jew. He could not have suffered pain and loss and death. Adorno sees that contemplating all things as they would present themselves from the standpoint of redemption in, as he tells us, quote, the messianic light, requires that we contemplate all things from the vantage point of the cross. Did Adorno contemplate all things from the vantage point of the cross? Not that I know of, but he might have. There is nothing in his critique of modern society that touches the Palestinian Jew, Jesus. But if there is a theology of Karl Marx, it is not only negative. The theology of Karl Marx sheds light on, it reveals why Christianity today is not Christianity. It sheds light on the possibility of a Christianity not dominated by the abstract value form of the commodity. It invites us to embrace a theology we can value for the substances out of which it is composed. But what would it look like to contemplate all things from the vantage point of redemption, from the vantage point of the cross? St. Paul again gives us a hint in chapter 8 of his letter to the Romans. Quote, I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory about to be revealed to us. And here it is. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. It is waiting for us. Waiting for us to do what? Quote, for the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. But in what does this freedom consist? Why is creation looking to us? Quote, we know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now, and not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly while we wait for adoption. Adoption? Quote, the redemption of our bodies. We of all people should grasp the meaning of this passage as we observe and experience the groaning in labor pains of creation all around us, and as we observe and experience our own groaning in pain. The tension between surface form and underlying abstract value form has become palpable. Modern Christianity tells us to ignore our bodies, or it tells us that technology will resolve the problem of our bodies, or that moving to Mars will resolve the problem of our bodies, or AI will resolve the problem of our bodies. It tells us that creation will be fine. But creation is not fine. It is groaning and it is waiting for us. Not to ignore our bodies, not to ignore creation, waiting for and with us for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. Did Marx believe this? Was this part of Marx's theology? Indeed, I think it was. But I'm eager to know what you think. This has been the Theology of Karl Marx, brought to you live from the C. Robbins Clark Library at St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Berkeley. I hope you have enjoyed these 8 seminars. If you have, please get in touch with me and let me know what you think